Hello and welcome to the first instalment of the Artrium's watercolour project for the month of November. My name's Claire for those who don't know me, but I'm sure a lot of you will remember me from the Artrium when I used to work there. So all this month we're going to be looking at a bit of an introduction to watercolours and how we use our materials effectively. We'll then be moving on to colour mixing, looking at a bit of colour theory, mixing different colours into tints and shades. And then later on we'll be looking at portraits and landscapes and applying all of the techniques that we've learned throughout these weeks to create a final piece. So you should have had a project pack sent out with everything you need to complete this project. So for the introduction video, which is today, you're going to need your paint, you're going to need your paintbrushes, some watercolour paper, some gum tape or masking tape and some tissue. I hope everyone's keeping safe and well during this strange time, and I hope these videos over the next couple of weeks give you a bit of a distraction or something to do, whether you're isolating or not. And we'll just get started. I'm going to go off camera so you can see what I'm doing a little bit better, and I hope you enjoyed this video. So what I firstly want to talk about is the importance of the materials that you are using. Now, I would always recommend that we paint on watercolour paper. But just to show you what it would be like on normal everyday paper, sort of photocopy paper, I'm going to just show you an example and show you sort of how it compares to the watercolour paper. So I'm going to add a little bit of water first. So I'm going into the palette, I'm just going to go for a red so that it comes very clearly. I'm going to start. Now you can see that it's not very sort of bold or anything. So I'm going to start mixing a little bit more in the red. Build up that pigment in the paintbrush. So we are getting a little bit more colour on there. But as you can already start to see, well, what I can see, I will hold it up, is it's starting to sort of clump up all of the little bits of paper. You know, eventually this is going to tear because the paper's not strong enough to handle all of the moisture. Then underneath as well, once that dries, it'll sort of blister, so you'll get very crinkled paper as well. So if normal paper's the only thing that you do have, I would recommend sort of investing in some watercolour paper. I will include a lot of this in your pack as well, so you don't have to worry for the time being. But if it's something that you want to take up in the future, then I would definitely recommend sort of getting some watercolour paper. So I'm going to show you that same, so what I've done is created a bit of a gradient across, going from dark to light. I'm going to do that same thing on watercolour paper just to show you how different the quality is. And so I'm going to start again, just using the same brush. Small amount of water, just getting that prepared for the paint. And I'm going to get my paint palette back again, build up a bit of a pigment and start gliding that on, and instantly we see that it comes off a better quality than just using your regular cartridge paper. I'm going to continue to create a bit of a gradient. We will talk about this in more detail in the next few videos, but just to show you the importance of using the watercolour paper. And I'm going to put them side by side just so you can see what I'm talking about. So you can instantly see this is seamless. It goes from a sort of bold red colour all the way down to a sort of translucent, and it disappears towards the end. This one, it's kind of all clumped at the top. It does have that bit of gradient, so you know, if you're just practicing, you can go for it, but you won't get the results that you want or that you're able to achieve with this watercolour paper. We have plenty at the Artrium, so if you run out, just get in touch and we'll get you some more. But just for up close. And then this one up close. It's almost shiny as well. It's definitely a better quality. Now I've cut off a bit of a sample of the watercolour paper to show you how to blot the watercolour if you've put too much on. And it's also a good technique if you want to make a kind of a cloudy effect for a sky, or sort of any sort of texture that looks quite soft. So I'm going to do two examples. In the first one I'm going to use some toilet paper to blot it, and I'm going to press quite firmly, and we'll see how that comes up. I'm going to change my colour. Do you know what? I'm going to change my brush actually because there's quite a bit of a red stained on there. I'm going to go for a smaller brush. I'm going to add quite a lot of water just to show you this. So this is the first one. It's quite sort of it's kind of puddled almost. I think I'm going to go for a blue. I'll go for this dark blue just so that it comes up on the camera nicely. We'll build up that pigment. So because I've added quite a lot of water, it's instantly going quite diluted. It's quite uneven because it's spreading all over the place. You can't really control it when you've got too much water on. Okay, now I'm going to get a piece of toilet paper and just kind of fold it up. And as you can see on toilet paper, it's quite a deep texture compared to the tissue that I'm going to use in the next example. I'm going to fold it over a little bit so that we don't totally drown it. What I'm going to do, I'm going to get the most sort of pooled area down here. I'm going to press quite firmly. And we're going to lift it up. And you can see there that it has took some away, but it's also left that sort of perforated texture. So I'm going to do it again up there. And you can see where the toilet paper is being folded. And I mean, if you wanted to do a technique like this and you needed this specific textured background, then it is a good option. But in general terms, when you are blotting your paint away, you want it to be kind of seamless and look quite soft. So that is Exhibit A. Now we're going to do the same thing again, but I'm going to add a little bit less water so that we can control it a bit more. I'm going to spread that around a bit so it's not as sort of pooled up, and it's not, the page isn't totally dripping. So we've got that nice sort of layer, a thin layer of water. And again, I'm going to build up the pigment on my brush. See, so instantly that's came up much bolder and much more pigmented than it did when there was quite a large pool of water on this one. So I'm just going to go ahead and spread that out. I might actually add a little bit more because I could do with a bit more. It's just finding that right balance of how much moisture you want to put onto the page. So I don't want it to be completely dry because there'll be nothing to sort of blot. Okay, now I'm going to use a piece of kitchen roll, and if you look at this, and I'm going to compare a bit of toilet roll to it as well. If toilet roll is the only thing you do have, just don't apply it too firmly, is what I'll say. So here's the toilet roll. I mean, you do get better toilet rolls than this. That might not be as textured, but in comparison to the tissue, focus there, there's barely any texture. I mean, there is a little bit, the tiny little holes all around there, but you know, not as much as this. I'm going to add a bit more water because it's dried up as I've been banging on about that. There we go. What I'm going to do is make it quite small. You can even rip a bit off. You don't have to like use a big clump of it. I would like to soften it up a little bit. You don't have to do this, but I find that it's much more flexible and easier to use. And then I'm just going to very gently start blotting away the bits that I don't want. So I'm going to use as if it was like a cloudy sky, and I wanted to just remove certain areas to make it look quite serene and calm. And I want it to just blend very nicely. So I'm always being very gentle, I'm not pushing too firmly. And you can still blend that in. Another bit. You can even just use one layer of it if it's not too like soaked. You can even just use the corner or the edges to just blend it all in nicely. You know, so it's never a race when you're making a piece of artwork. It's, you know, sometimes it takes time. I'm just going to go into them areas where I want them to be much lighter. And you can like barely see any of the texture coming off of the tissue, or the paper towel that I'm using. I would recommend using kitchen roll or even the paper towels from the Artrium, the green or the blue ones. They're not as textured as toilet roll. So because it's just an example and like a sample piece, it's hard to sort of show you what the full product would be, but later on when we do the landscapes, you know, we will go into more detail. But this is from the toilet roll, where we've got a lot of texture in there that we didn't really want. Well, for the sake of this video, I'm going to say that we didn't want that texture. And then later this is using a much firmer method, softer method, sorry. And we have sort of controlled it a lot more by not using as much water on the page. And also the tissue that we used was not as textured, so we can control what we wanted. And I've just done this mainly to show you how you can control it. I could make this sort of any texture that I wanted depending on what I was going to paint. So what I'm going to talk about now is when we actually wet an entire piece of paper, and this is without it being taped down. So I'm going to show you what happens when we do that. I'm going to go back to my larger brush, what we used in the beginning with the red, and I'm going to just go for it and wet the entire paper. I'm just doing this quite quickly just to show you. And we can already see, I'm not sure if you can see on camera, you can kind of a little bit how it is already starting to roll up and take a different shape to how it was when it was dry. I'm going to make sure all those edges are wet so that you can see what happens. Now you can instantly see that it's taken a different shape. Apologies for the camera focusing differently, so hopefully you can all see it clearly. And it's getting even more raised. Even when I've done that, it's starting to curl under. So I will try and flatten it as much as I can, but it's always going to pop back up when it's wet. And also it would dry like this as well. So just to show you how this can cause problems, I'm going to add some colour. I might even add more than one colour this time. So let's just go back for the red. I'm going to mix up quite a dark pigment. Although the paper's really wet, so it will wash this out a lot. You see in the middle where this bit hasn't really moved, because it's pooling inside, because it's sort of curved over here, curved over this side, so it's all pooling in the middle, which will mean that all your paint is going there and it's not being distributed as evenly. And also towards the edges, you might not be able to see very well, but it is kind of pooling towards the edge as well. So I'm going to go in with some blue as well over this. So I'm going to try and show you a little bit more how it's pulled up in the centre there. The better way to show you would be to just move it, and can you see it all dripping down? This can make quite a nice effect, but your paper is always going to be quite buckled at the edges. And when that dries, you will sort of see where it's all pulled together and where you're not able to control it. I know these brush strokes aren't, you know, as soft as what you would normally see. It's just because I'm showing you the example. We will build on that technique. So what I'm trying to say at this stage is we need to secure the paper to a surface before we start adding lots of moisture and lots of paint, because it's going to crinkle up and you can't really reverse that once the paint's on without sort of damaging the paint. So I'm going to tape down some paper and do the exact same sort of thing, adding paint and water, and then I'm going to show you how it compares with this one. Now, as you can see, I've stuck down a piece of watercolour paper using gum tape. Now, you would normally stick gum tape onto a board or something, but just for the sake of this video, I haven't got a board at home, so I've just stuck it onto the table for now, which will take quite a lot of cleaning up. If I don't let it stick too much, it should be fine, but it does get really sticky and it can be hard to get off. So I would recommend using masking tape if you're at home and if you don't have any gum tape. I will include some into the pack, but just be aware that when you peel it off and stuff, once it's dry, it can be a bit of a nightmare. So I don't have any masking tape at the minute, or I would have showed you that way. But it still works all the same way, and you'll still get to see what I'm talking about. So again, I'm going to take my paint palette and just start to wet the paper. And as you can see, the paper doesn't curl up. because it's nice and secured onto the table or onto the surface. Now remember, you don't really want to drown the paper, you just want to have that nice thin layer ready to add your paint, because the more water you have on, the more diluted your paint's going to go on, so it doesn't matter how much you mix up the pigment in the paint pan, it won't come up as strong if there's a lot of water. So I'm going to use the same colours again. That red, which is coming up quite pinky. I'm going to start off with a bit of blue in this corner, and I'm going to eventually meet them in the middle. Now it will kind of move a little bit, but it's certainly not as much as what it was without the secured edges. But normally with masking tape it kind of would secure it a bit more, I think. But it's certainly not all running into the middle. Like, see how if you rewind this video when it goes onto YouTube, we had that pool in the middle and we were able to move the paper around, and with this we're not really getting that because it's nice and secure and we have a lot more control over what we're actually doing. Going to continue washing this all out, and we're going to have a nice blended sort of gradient in the middle. And because of the way that it's washed out as well, it kind of looks more pink and purple than blue and red. Going to add a bit more water to make this a little bit more seamless, and I might actually go back in with my tissue and get rid of some of those harsh edges. Then I'm just scrunching it a bit to have a bit more sort of freedom with it. And very gently going in and kind of mopping up any bits. And create lots of nice textures using this method. So there is quite a lot of water pulling up, and when there is lots of water you will get these blotchy areas, but if you keep going in quite gently you'll be able to sort of control that, and then you can go back over with your paintbrush to soften those lines, but just don't start adding loads more water again if you don't want to get back to square one. And you also have to have a lot of patience with watercolours, because what we could do is wait for this to dry and then go back over it again. See where that's pooling there? Let's get rid of that. So once you wait for it to dry, you can always go back in because all of the colours are water based, meaning that you can break them back down again and you can continue washing them out. I mean, you won't be able to wash it out as much as when it was wet, but there is sort of like areas for change. See how this is nearly dry in here, but I can still go in and wash it back out. And that's quite a harsh line there. And because the paper is watercolour paper, it is quite strong and durable, so you don't have to worry about tearing it too much. I mean, there will be a limit on it of how much you can sort of add the moisture and the friction with the brush, but you know, if you're careful, it's normally fine. So I'm going to show you this version. It's not fully dry yet, but it is kind of very crinkled. It's all crinkling up at the sides, quite pooled in the middle. We didn't have much control over where the paint was going to end up. But then with this one, although it is a very quick example and it does need a lot of work sort of to be a nice fluid background, you can clearly see that it is an improvement. Now, the final thing that what we're going to look at in this video is how to apply pencil underneath the watercolour. So normally when you are painting, you will need something to go from. It's a very sort of high skill if you're able to just paint straight onto the paper and get everything right. So what I like to do is start with a pencil drawing and then work on my painting. So just very basic and very quickly, I'm just going to draw a shape. I might draw like a star or a heart or something like that, and I'm going to show you what it would look like if your pencil lines were really thick and bold, and then also next to it what it's like when it's quite light, and you'll just see the difference. So actually I think I am going to just go with a heart shape just so that it's very quick. And I'm also going to show you how we can build up the colours within that 2D shape to make it look a bit more 3D. So I'm going to start, it's going to be upside down for you to begin with, but I will turn it round. I'm going to start with a very bold heart. I'm going to go in quite bold. And it's not going to be perfect, it's just to show as an example. Apologies again for the camera going in and out of focus, I don't think I can control it. So here we are, just a very basic heart shape. Quite bold, because if it wasn't this bold you wouldn't be able to really see it. And then I'm going to take my brush again, I'm going to go for the smaller brush. Just give it a little bit of a clean. And we'll stick with the red. Although I have used the blue on this, but it's stained a little bit. And then we're just going to fill this in. Trying not to lift the brush up too much and trying to keep it all blended, because once we do that you'll see how it just overlaps and it doesn't kind of run smoothly. So I'm trying to get it in one sweep. Adding just a bit of water to make it more even. So that's just with one wash of colour over it, and not really considering the three-dimensional aspects of it. It's just sort of a two-dimensional shape. And also where we have those like kind of pools, I'm just going to grab a little bit of tissue again. Where it pulls up, you can certainly see at the top. Just going to blot that with the tissue so it's not as bold. And then go back in with just a little bit of water on a brush. It doesn't have any paint on it at this stage. Let's see a tiny bit at the bottom. Soak that up. You can even get your tissue and sort of dry your brush on it as well, and then that's another way to dry up the sort of pools of water. So there we are. So that's with a very bold pencil line. So now I'm going to show you another way of how to make it more realistic. And although it's a heart shape, which is it's not very a realistic natural shape like in the human anatomy or anything like that, but it's just again an example, just to make it look a little bit more 3D and lifelike. So I'm going to turn the page to me again this time. I'm going to continue to paint while it's facing me, just because I won't get a true representation when it's upside down, but I will turn it around throughout. So I'm going to draw very, very lightly the same sort of sized heart, and doing it this way. So if you start off really bold, there's that kind of no room to change anything, because once it's on, it's on. Although you can erase it, it's still going to remain. It's kind of not what we really want to go for. So say you're drawing down as perfect as you can before adding any water to it, because once the water hits the pencil line, it is very difficult to get off unless you're going to paint quite dark over it. So I am going to go over as much as I can with the little eraser, just enough so I can see. So I'm going to go back with the exact same brush, exact same colours. I'm going to sort of build a bit of pigment, add the water. And what I should have mentioned before is that we're going to be using this palette all the way through, so we're going to be using these dried paints, and once you add the water and the more you mix in the colour, the more pigmented it will get. You can also get tubes of watercolour paint that are already like a wet paint, but just for the sake of this project we're going to be using this palette. It's just easier for everyone to sort of get it out into the packs. Right, what I'm going to start doing now is very gently with a small brush following this line around. And what you can do if you're feeling brave is also kind of go over the line a little bit if you want to, so that it's even more concealed. You just have to keep the consistency of the paint at a similar level all the way throughout. I'm just going to give it like a very thin wash of colour just for now. And what you can do as well is use the lid of your palette. I will be going into more detail in the next few videos of, you know, colour mixing and all that. I just wanted to get these very basic steps down before we start to really get into the project, because this is what we really need to start off with. So I'm treating everyone as if they're a beginner. Although we might have some more advanced painters in the project, feel free, you know, to use your techniques that you already have. And feel free to share them with other people on the Artrium page as well. So now I have like a little bit of a bank of colour that's all going to be the same consistency and shade. So I am taking a lot more time on this than what I did in the first example, just to show that the effort does pay off. So you can get that paint off your brush again. What I am doing, I've got a bit of tissue here that I'm drying the brush on, because I don't want to get too much moisture, although I want to be able to control the paint that I've already put on. If you get too much moisture, then it's going to start like sort of seeping out of those lines on the edge, and your shape will kind of become distorted. So by using a thin brush, you can really be precise in your application. So I'm just continuing to work on this paint. Even if it dries a little bit, like I said before, you can easily go back in with some water and control those lines. So I am starting to build quite a bit of a darker line along this edge, just to start building on like a 3D effect. So I'm going to add more and more pigment from the dry paint palette to my little pot here, a little sort of bank of colour. I'm just going to continue that all the way around. And then I'm going to blend that into the centre. What you would normally do with watercolours, which is very different from oil painting, is you would work your way up to the darker colours, whereas with oil paints you work your way up to light colours. But it's quite hard once it's quite dark. If you can't really blot the colour out, it's hard to get it back to light. So what I'm going to do at this point is sort of dry off my brush, leave a little bit of water on, go into the white for the first time, and because my brush still has a bit of red paint on, we'll get that sort of pinky effect. And I'll just show you that it is quite hard to get that in the middle where we want the white, unless you just kind of move the paint away. So I'm going to come back with like a dry brush and continue blending. So if you blend it outwards, then that sort of watercolour paint is going to pool at the edges where we want it to be most dark. And that'll like help us to smooth it out a bit as well. So what we will be doing towards sort of the middle part and the end part of this workshop is looking at more organic shapes and how we can make them more lifelike within our painting. So this isn't a very good example of this because it is just a very basic shape. So I'm trying to give it a little bit of that three-dimensional feel. I'm going to get the tissue and just blot out the middle to create that sort of light centre just on one side to give it a kind of a shine effect. I'm going to just sort of select an area over this side to leave white, well, leave kind of a lighter colour to give a bit of 3D shine. It's all about blending and a lot of patience, and it is quite relaxing. It's quite a relaxing form of art. There's not really any rules, although I've give you some tips and tricks. You might not find them as tips. You might prefer to use like alternative methods, which is absolutely fine. You're your own individual person, and I'm not here to tell you how to present your art. Just going back in with a little bit of white. You can see that if you don't add as much water, it kind of goes into a little bit of a paste, like a thick paste. So if you do need it to be more opaque, you can achieve that, but if you're pouring it back onto a wet surface, it will break down again. And what you can also do is add darker colours, like the black, just ever so slightly into the red to make it even deeper colour, although it's not as pigmented, it is a darker colour altogether, so you could add that to the edges to make it even more 3D effect. So it does take quite a long time and a lot of practice as well. But when you're happy, although this could do with more work to make it even more 3D, I'm going to leave it there because we can clearly see that, if I turn that around so you can see it now, that it kind of does look more raised out of the page. And we'll be able to see this technique in more in action really when we are doing the portraits and more organic shapes like faces and facial features and stuff like that, so that we'll be able to give more of a realistic feel. So if you do want to do basic shapes like this, that's absolutely fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I'm just trying to think of how we can incorporate different techniques so that these workshops have value and that you feel like you're learning something from them. So if anyone has any questions, just get in touch on the Artrium's Facebook page or comment below when the video's live, because I'll be there reading all of the comments as well. And I will get back to you as soon as possible. So I'll be free. This video will air at 6 o'clock. And I'll be free all the way up until 8 o'clock to answer any questions. So even if it's like an afterthought, you can still get in touch. I'll respond, as long as it's not at midnight, because I'll be asleep. So that's kind of what we'll be covering today. We've looked at the importance of the watercolour paper that we use. So these are the dried pieces. You can clearly see that the normal paper, it's kind of got loads of little bits of the paper fibres all gathered up, and it doesn't give you this like nice smooth gradient that you get with the watercolour paper. We then used different types of tissue, the toilet paper and the kitchen roll kind of paper towel, and you can see how that's dried. That came out even more, those lines, and how we pressed on quite firmly. You can see the massive difference of how sort of smooth this second one is that I did. We looked at using different pencil sort of pressure on the page and how it can look more unrealistic when you do have a big outline, and also adding a really thin outline and building up that paint to create more of a 3D effect. So I've really enjoyed making this video. I wanted to do a very basic introduction because I'm not sure of everyone's understanding of watercolours, and I'm not sure why the camera keeps on focusing in and out. I'll have to look at getting that fixed. I wonder if I leave my hand there it would just focus. But I really have enjoyed showing you these techniques. Next time we are going to look at more of a colour theory approach and how we mix different colours, and sort of what colours we add together, the primary colours to make secondary colours, and how we can build tints and shades within that so that we know what we're going to apply to the page before we kind of make any decisions to add colour to a page. When we don't really know what we're adding, we're gonna like really look into mixing colours, and then after that we will have built those techniques enough to move on to create some pieces of art, whether that's a portrait or a landscape. I'm going to cover both, but it's up to you what you wish to submit for the exhibition. I didn't really want to tell you exactly what to put into the exhibition because it's your work, but I was thinking during these times it's not a nice time to go through, so I was going to say our theme could be something that makes you smile, something that makes you happy. It could be a person in your life who brings you a lot of joy. It could be a place where you like to go and do your exercise daily. You know, it could be a nice landscape of a beach. It could be your significant other or one of your children, or it's totally up to you. I just want to see things that make you happy. So I'll be making my own artwork as well for the exhibition, so I hope you'll all join me in submitting some lovely pieces. So I'm going to log off now because it has been quite a long one, and I'll see you next time. Thank you all so much for watching. Bye!